right, happy Thursday. 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 Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Live Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell. I'm founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine. And as always, it's great to have you here, wherever you're coming from. Many of you are probably watching us on the Healthy Indoors online global community, either live or after the fact. But some of you are probably catching our other portals on social media, as well as Vimeo and YouTube. So, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the Healthy Indoors community because that's a place many of you are familiar with our healthyindoors.com site, which is our kind of our mothership. We have all of our old archives uh, from the publications and a lot of our videos. But the Healthy Indoors online global community is a platform that we launched last year and starting to go full blown now with this. This is a indoor environmental slash sustainability centric platform where you can network with other professionals. You can see our content. Members of the community now have the opportunity to watch a monthly Ask Me Anything event that we host there. And these AMAs are they're really nice. We bring an industry expert in, subject matter expert, and have them on board to let you join in and actually ask questions live with them. Last month's the September one was with Jeff May, who's a longtime expert in the IAQ industry, and that was a great event. We've got another one coming up in a week or so with Dr. David Krause, so we'll give you more on that information. But of course, to be able to attend those, you need to be a member of the Healthy Indoors online global community, and you can learn more about that at healthyindoors.global. That's the website for it, and that's where you find out about it. So, we're going to be back with a really interesting show today. Pretty excited about some of the things we'll be talking about. 2 weeks ago, we had a show with Nate Adams and Brian Orr, talking about some of the federal initiatives that were underway and happening. One of which, of course, was the Clean Air and Buildings Challenge by EPA that happened earlier in 2022, and also the Inflation Reduction Act. Brought up a lot more talk about how this could affect the HVAC and building performance industries. So today, our guest, happy to say, is Bill Spohn. Longtime person in the industry, very well known, very well respected gentleman. So we're going to talk further about these topics and some other topics when we come back after a brief word from our sponsor. So our guest today is Bill Spohn. He's a professional engineer and president of TrueTech Tools Limited, organization that's been selling equipment in the industry and very well known to probably many of you in the audience. Bill also featured his house. We'll talk about his house a little bit later, but he has spohnhome.com, talking about his high performance modular house that was built a while back. So real interesting stuff from Bill. So I welcome him in now. Bill, how are you?
Great, Bob. Thank you for inviting me on the show, and really respect what you do out there.
Well, thank you, and the feeling is very mutual. You're no stranger to podcasts. I mean, you do a lot of podcasting. You speak on other people's
Mhm.
podcasts. You do live industry presentations. I've seen you present before, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you about things. So
Yep.
let's for those some people in the audience may not be familiar with you. So I just want to just do a quick little recap. You started well, you're a licensed professional engineer, so you and mechanical, obviously,
Right.
I'm assuming.
Yep.
And you started with Testo, right, years ago?
Actually started in sort of the HVAC building industry with Bacharach
Okay.
in 1988. Then did a short stint with a company that was 10 years there, and then worked at a company called Superior Valve, and then for a short period of time, and then worked for Testo for 10 years. So from 99 to 2009, I worked for Testo. And then near the end of my time with Testo there, one of my employees, Jim Bergman, and his dad started True Tech Tools. And it grew pretty rapidly. They sought me out for some advice. And then I joined full time in 2009.
So, and you've spent a lot of time doing really volunteer work in the industry too, right? You've been on committees, and I
I'm a
mean,
chronic volunteer, Bob.
I
Yes. It's a
know.
condition.
Why? Why? I'm no. It's. I mean, it's great. I'm not. I'm not questioning it, but it's like many people just can't seem to find the time to even do the work. They're paying work, but to do volunteer work, I think is just it's really extraordinary.
Well,
And it's really beneficial.
thank you. I look at it though like an opportunity. Like when I sort of the public commitment of saying I'm going to volunteer to do something, I have to own up to that. So I seek things out which I will volunteer for, which will advance me personally or professionally. So when I make that public commitment, you try very hard to honor that, and usually do. And in that case, it helps me grow. So that's my hack, my life hack. We could stop the whole podcast there. I'm
Yeah,
giving you a life hack.
that's the important. That's really an important one. Well, and on your LinkedIn page, it's interesting to say that you have somewhere you posted, I think it was on LinkedIn, that you have a great team around you, so that it frees you up to be able to do this stuff too. Because you
Yeah,
need
I
that.
think I gave you a little bio. It's like so that I can just wander around doing silly, but important things. I think so.
But it gives you a little autonomy there.
Yeah.
Um, so we advertised that Joe Madash would be joining us on the show, and he's unable to join us today. So Joe, wherever you are, he's in the mountain. I don't know where he is, but anyway, Joe was unable to be on the show. We're going to have him on in a future episode, but I figured at the very least we needed to acknowledge that because
That's the
all of our show
quietest
promotion.
Joe has ever been that I know of.
he There you go.
Yeah.
So and Joe used to be for the first year or so when we went live with this weekly. Joe was a co-host of the show, so he was on a lot of the earlier episodes of our program. So miss him and hope to see him again soon. So I guess to the matter at hand, right?
Mhm.
We're I guess the EPA the EPA Clean Air and Buildings Challenge is it's a pretty big factor of why we're going to be discussing today, and how that new initiative from EPA and from the White House may affect the HVAC industry and building performance industries. To that end, last week the White House had the first ever dedicated event at the White House about indoor air quality that I can remember in my career. I've never seen anything like this before. It was a half-day event that was quite interesting. I'm going to show a clip quickly from Joe Allen, who was doing one of the kickoff keynote.
And enhance productivity. Why spend dollars recruiting talent and then putting them in a place with poor IAQ where they can't think, concentrate, do their work, and they get sick more often? It doesn't make sense. Healthy buildings are really about protecting your people, your business, and your assets. Businesses must rethink their environmental health and safety and real estate strategies, moving past performative check-the-box IAQ, and incorporate healthy buildings into their ESG plans. Put all this together, the COVID benefits, the health benefits, the equity benefits, the climate benefits, the business benefits. It becomes quite clear there's no reason not to improve indoor air quality in our buildings. Now that the world has experienced COVID, healthy buildings are no longer nice to have, they're the new minimum.
Yeah. And just to that clean air challenge, the White House is inviting building owners and operators across the country to join us in our efforts to continue fighting the spread of COVID-19 by publicly pledging to meet the Clean Air and Buildings Challenge. So this initiative was driven by the pandemic and COVID, and there's 4 action steps: creating a clean indoor air action plan, optimizing fresh air ventilation, um, enhancing air filtration and air cleaning, and also engaging the building community. So to that end, the programs, there's nothing revolutionary there, right, Bill? I mean,
No, there isn't. I treat it sort of like the White House challenge is basically Uncle Sam saying, "Pay attention." And Joe Allen, what he said, and this not to be rude to Joe, but is he saying like, "Duh"? Why aren't we doing more of this? And that's I think some of the frustration that I've felt over time, because I've heard that I first heard the term IAQ in 1995. So that's like 27 years ago. And that was I was with Bacharach, and it IAQ isn't a commodity that you can buy. I feel there is much curiosity and I'll just say, little real action on IAQ, and it becomes very frustrating. And even the pledge that they're asking for is just a pledge. It doesn't mandate action, and I don't think they really can. But it's sort of a frustrating mix of things. And I really found interesting the conversation you had with Brian Orr and Nate Adams a couple weeks ago. I went through that and took a lot of notes. So, and I want to sort of springboard off of that, but there was a certain amount of frustration that Brian and Nate exhibited, and I'm exhibiting that too.
Now you're gonna have to elaborate on that. Now you said give me a little bit of insight to the frustration that you're experiencing that they also voiced 2 weeks ago in the program.
Sure. So the principles are well understood. It's like I even made note here. I had Bill Bonfleth, who is a professor at Penn State University, was the chair of the pandemic task force for ASHRAE. He was on my podcast, episode 95, if you want to look that back up, Building HVAC Science. He pointed out that they looked at things like UV germicidal radiation being used in rural schools in Pennsylvania in 1947 and showed a documented decline in measles outbreak in the schools. So there's techniques that have been known for lifetimes, basically. And then going back to something that Brian mentioned in the podcast or the show a couple weeks ago, fresh air, like what your grandmother told you: drink plenty of water, get plenty of fresh air, opening up the house, that kind of thing. And it just goes back to frustrations. People are looking for a fix. They're looking to buy IAQ. You can't buy IAQ. You have to work through a process, and it's so individual. There's almost no common baseline to enter into it, such that someone could say, here's a product that does it. It's not like an internet router or a toaster oven or a convection oven. It's so individual.
No, and that's such a great point, Bill. You really, yeah, there is not an off-the-shelf widget. Well, it's not even a single way to even analyze or assess, right?
Yeah.
We don't have a tricorder like Star Trek.
Right.
You can't just all of a sudden, there's no device that TrueTech sells that can do that, right?
Nope.
They can just tell you good air, bad air. But yet clients ask for that, and I think a lot of people in the general population, I think, feel that way as well.
And when you get into it, they ask for it, and then you start to really talk about it in the level of detail that's necessary. And even, Brian and Nate talked about this, people's eyes glaze over, their ears glaze over, whatever, but it just becomes a little bit too much. However, I just don't want to sound like, doom and gloom here. I think this is an important, I made note of this date of that White House meeting or symposium, to look back in a few years to see if that deed could be looked at like a point of inflection or a turning point, because I think it has the potential to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. I've been in the industry for a bit. I mean, I think I started what would be effectively indoor air quality stuff was '86, so it's been a little while. And and the term IAQ really was coming of age late '80s, early '90s, right?
Mhm.
And that usually was not synonymous, but tagged along with BRI, building related illness. Those were the early
Sick
acronyms that
building
were flying
syndrome,
around the industry.
SDS. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, this could be a good inflection point on the industry. Although now I'm looking back, and you were in the industry at that point, or getting in the industry in 1992 to 94. There was a lot of initiatives on a federal level, right? Reps Kennedy and I'm forgetting the other one. Oh, this is terrible. Susan's going to grill me for this. But there were proposed legislative measures in Congress that looked like they were going to get some traction, because that's when we were dealing with environmental tobacco smoke,
Mhm.
big ETS thing going on. EPA's indoor air division was pretty well financed and funded, kind of fighting big tobacco, right? That was the incentive. And then all of a sudden it was like it flipped on a dime in 94. You had the midterm elections, and suddenly, it's like the wind went out of the sails for at least a federal level pushing an IAQ initiative.
Yeah. I think things like this, again, I'm not talking doom and gloom, but things like this raise the level of awareness, raise the amount of attention, and they're going to be, programs that get put into place. None of them are perfect, but I think they ignite change with the right kind of people, and it raises awareness. Consumers will start to ask questions. Contractors will start to be engaged. Systems and programs will come forth. I think it's slow progress. Nothing's perfect when government's involved.
Sure, and like you mentioned, you're raising the level of awareness now. I mean, that's certain. That's. I think the whole pandemic's done that, has it not? I
Yeah,
mean, people are more attuned to indoor environments. First, spending the first part of 2020 at home, right, sequestered,
yeah.
and and so I think we're at a moment in time where it makes sense to try to drive these initiatives further forward. Hopefully,
Yeah, and I think again, going back to the basics, like Brian talked a little bit about, humidity control, ventilation, and filtration. Those are some of the things that have been out there in the ASHRAE world. Engineers have known about it. They've been built into buildings to a large extent for comfort. But then sort of there's this balance between comfort, energy efficiency, and health. Um, and I think Joe Allen mentioned it in his presentation there, that it's possible to sort of achieve a sweet spot in that Venn diagram, where you can get to a place where energy efficiency, health, and comfort are all being equally addressed.
but I think you have to, right? I mean, that's because that was always, that was always the feelings back when I first got in the industry, late '80s, early '90s. You can have energy efficiency, or you can have indoor environmental quality. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you need both. We're not at a point in time where you can sacrifice one for the other. I don't believe, are we?
You're not. And I think Robert Bean.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of his statements, and I'm paraphrasing here, is build for people, good buildings follow. So you got to remember, the whole purpose of creating shelter or enclosures is for the people. And you have to look towards aspects that are important to the people that are inside that building or shelter. And I think, in an extreme case, you could look at, say, like a hospital that is definitely built to help manage people that are sick, illnesses, things like that. So there are many layers of control and treatment, activation, filtration of the air that are taking place to maintain a very safe and environment where people can regain their health.
But I think there's more of a concern in healthcare facilities, for that. And I think that's more of a mandate, whereas in standard
Yeah.
office spaces, and even in our residences. I mean, the way we traditionally build in the United States, we really don't provide for good sources of ventilation. Generally we haven't traditionally, right? Most single family homes in this country don't really have an outside air provision. It's
Right.
through leakage. That's not a
Right.
great way to do it.
It's
Uh,
accidental. Yeah.
and yeah. So I think I think it's important to again, to take this, because I think that we're more attuned to indoor air quality issues now, perhaps. I hope. And but there's also, don't you think there's a risk that we're going to end up in a situation where we're um you know it seems like we have a very short attention span as a species.
What'd you say?
We have a short attention. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Thank you. And I was going to repeat myself like an idiot too. And I also have to comment. Susan Valenti, our editor at Healthy Indoors Magazine, pointed out it was Henry Waxman, the name that I couldn't find earlier,
Okay.
and I should know that.
Yeah.
We've done articles about him. Whatever. There's one thing I'm finding as I'm getting older. I don't know if this is true for you, but like, my entire capacity for memory, it's still there, but it has a finite value. So if I put more in, something spills out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like little alphabet blocks moving in through your ears, one of my friends said. Or what I try to do is I try to capture it somewhere I know where it is, and then I let go of it and just
And
know
that's
if
what
I
I
can
do a
go
lot
back
now
to it.
too. But if it's not in notes, and
Yes.
I don't write it down, or put it in a planner or put it in my phone, yeah, there's a tendency to drift on me. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. I think there are, with the improvements in sensors. There now is the ability to for interested parties, building owners, to broadcast their air quality parameters. And I think the more that information is available, the more people will become interested in it, become curious about it, and perhaps even begin to demand it once they start to, catch on with what the White House has been talking about.
Well, there's certainly different levels of sensor technology out there, right? We've got
Mhm.
pure consumer level sensors that are, they're in that $200-ish range, right? Maybe let's say the $100 to $400 range is where they fall. And then you have the more of the commercial not professional analytic equipment, but professional sensing equipment that's, now over the 500 mark, right? Maybe
Mhm.
pushing as high as maybe 1500 on some of those standalone devices. A- and the thing is, I guess, do you see a market for all of these type of things? For the less expensive consumer ones, because there's been a lot of critique that they're not, necessarily all that accurate or replicatable until you start getting into calibratable equipment. So,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that? Because you are a distributor for a lot of this stuff.
sure. And it's not easy. For example, we got a message through our social media the other day, and it was actually ended up being from a consumer who received a report from a product, one of the products we sell, but it wasn't the exact one we sell. It's sold to a number of different entities, that told him he had chemicals, a high level of chemicals in the air in his home, and he wanted to buy something to speciate or tell him what those chemicals were. And when we sorted it out a little bit, what he was receiving was a signal or a message in a report that said you have total VOCs, volatile organic chemicals, are high. In it, but that's all the report could tell him. I mean, this is a sensor suite that has, reporting capabilities that's already $2,500, but it still can't tell you exactly what's going on. So the advice tends to be very generic. Look for sources of volatile chemicals and things like that. And even there's some good resources, some in the indoor air, the EPA indoor air site, that talk about simple version of a house, different rooms in the house, and what could be the sources of these various things. And a lot of it ends up being pretty simple. Sometimes it ends up being very mysterious, and that's where if the simple stuff doesn't take care of it, then you need to get a professional with more advanced equipment to diagnose and figure that out.
Yeah, and these devices you're talking about usually have a photoionization detector module, right? That's
The
for the
upper level
TVOC.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean,
even the
even the lower level ones are starting to have PID
right,
modules because they become a lot less expensive. I
yeah.
mean, I can't attest to the quality of the lesser priced ones, but I know there's a lot coming out of China. There's like devices that aren't a photoionization sensor. I mean, if you go to buy like a professional device, like for example, a Ray,
Mhm.
Ray
Ray
PPB, that's
systems,
about
yeah,
$8,000, right?
right.
Ish. That's an expensive photoionization detector. But I mean, there's modules out there. I think that at least wholesale, they're only under $100 for the module. So
Yeah, and that's the trick, though, is in the, Joe and I played around with the sensor module, but it's then you have to extract the information, linearize the signal, reduce noise, all that kind of thing, and you end up building a device around it. So the $100 module may end up in a $5,000 product
sure, that
because of
makes
everything
sense.
else that's required.
And again, a TVOC reading, that's a generalization of the volatile organic compounds that are in the space. But let's face it, you can trip one of those things off by having a cleaning compound or a magic marker or any number of things.
Or it's peeling an orange.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess all of that, you have to, the interpretation is the important part, right? And then maybe
Mhm.
that's hard to interpret. How, so I guess that's a good step off point there too. Um, these devices, the intent of these devices is to be logging information or looking at information over extended periods, right? This is
Sure.
ongoing data logging going on. So you're seeing trends. So
Yeah.
is there a value in a less expensive, maybe less accurate trending device, versus, let's say, a really accurate single excursion that like a professional might use, but walk in and out. They're not going to leave their $10,000 meter there.
Sure. The less expensive devices can be a gateway to information and further investigation. And like you said, it's absolutely critical to look at things over time. Snapshots, even snapshots on the order of 10, 20, 30 minutes still aren't really telling of the overall situation. When you begin to look at things over longer periods of time, and I've had access to graphs of all kinds of data over longer periods of time, you'll see some surprising information. And sometimes it could just be a sensor issue. You see a real huge spike, or it could be something actually is going on. There's a situation going on.
So you're seeing, are you seeing a lot more, I guess, adoption by building owners and the commercial entities for bringing in these remote sensor technology into commercial spaces like offices or maybe retail environments, hospitality. I mean, across the board, and even healthcare for that matter, because that typically we didn't have that in healthcare. Other than pressure sensors, maybe they didn't really monitor much else.
Yeah, for isolation.
And so, is that something that's becoming more like? Do you think that's going to be more mainstream?
I think it is, but it seems to go in waves, unfortunately. I mean, even something in the White House summit when they were discussing, I think someone from Clark County, Nevada, mentioned that there are sensors and ventilation systems in casinos that are way above the quality of that in schools. That's sort of like
Because there's more money there.
There's more money there, and you want to keep people, satisfied. People want to smoke, let them smoke, but take
Right.
filter out the particulates or ventilate whatever to do that, so that everybody can be happy and stay when it's about the money that's there. And you can't fault them. I mean,
No.
it's a real tactic, but those things can be employed, or those types of devices can be employed elsewhere. And I think one of the little clip you showed there was more about CO2 that Joe Allen mentioned.
I
Joe
believe so.
Allen
Yeah,
mentioned.
that because it was part of the Harvard, Syracuse University study that came out several years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that that in of itself, it's interesting that this event this past week, the symposium from the White House, was absolutely COVID centric. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, at least it was billed that way, right? The initial, but the discussions really weren't as I mean, it was more broad term indoor environmental quality. But I would say the focus still, they're talking in terms of air cleaning, remote air cleaning using standalone devices. And it seems like there's a lot of that is very going for aerosolized particle things like, like the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
Right.
But to me, they conflate the term air changes and air cycles. And that bothers me. As an engineer, that must bother you too, right? A
Mhm.
little bit, because it's not the same thing.
No. Yeah. Air changes deals with fresh air. Actually.
And the point is that if you're just using HEPA filtration, you're not dealing with gaseous contaminants, any of the off-gassing in the space. So again, great for particles, great for viral particles flying around. It's certainly great technology for that, but does not. If you don't have some sort of gas sorbent type technology there, you're really not addressing a lot of the other stuff that
Right.
gets in the
Unless
air.
it's you managing it separately with ventilation.
Yeah. So, but again, this event I think focused largely on on that mindset. There was another thing that came out, not to find fault with one of the speakers, but they did mention that they used they put a lot of ionizers in their school
I
space,
heard
and
that.
I stepped back a little, and when I heard that, I was like, "Oof, did you?" And not to again, not picking on the technology, but
Mm.
a couple of years back or a year and a half ago, Vinny Lobdell from Healthway was on, and he's been somebody that I've known for years. He's from this region. While him and his father founded this company, and he made a quote on the show that I thought was interesting about filtration and the technology for air cleaning. He said, "There's no bad technology. It's just it gets misused,
Mm.
misapplied. Like he says, all these technologies." The ionization, even use of ozone and certain things. I mean, they make sense if you use them in the right lane.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I think it's part of it is and this was I'm springboarding off of the discussion a couple weeks ago, but I think, Brian talked about HVAC techs being biased more towards action than versus study. So if the study of the situation and the study of the available technologies isn't employed as much towards action, action may be taken, and that's where the misapplication could come in. And I think the other thing is society in general is biased towards fixes versus really understanding what things take to fix. I would venture to guess that there are a lot of less teenagers doing work on their own carburetors than when you and I were growing up. Um, and it's of course it's a balance between money and time and attention to detail and appropriateness of action. And because of the complexity of the situation, all those things just make it really, really murky.
Well, and to that show 2 weeks ago, what's interesting is it seems like a lot of the building clean air challenge at least makes the assumption, or is at least saying that they believe that the HVAC workforce is going to do a lot of this front end triage. And to what you just said too, I think that's somewhat of an unrealistic assessment to think that technicians that are out there tasked with actually doing service work are going to have time to do indoor environmental studies, even if they had the knowledge to do it, and they don't really have the ground knowledge or even the diagnostic equipment, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
I was speaking with a business owner the other day, and it was about getting certification, and it was for sort of like energy certification, and he was very, very clear on it. He seems to be a very well organized business owner. He's got to look at turning over tickets to keep the business moving, and he's going to take appropriate steps. And if it's like responsible business owners will look at it and say it's really too murky for us to get into, so there'll be a hesitation. The consumer doesn't understand what I'm pitching. I can't be totally confident in what I'm doing. I'm going to stick with this, and I'll keep providing cooled, perhaps dehumidified or heated air, and some filtration,
hmm
but I'm just going to limit my scope to this activity.
well, it makes sense though, right? I mean, Bill, I think it makes total sense because it, it, it's a murky area, even as a professional consultant.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, in my career, I've leaned away from residential consulting, and because it's for me, it's a time trap, and I'm again not berating anybody that does that, but
Mhm.
in my business model, as an older owner and doing this now, I don't have time to go out and spend hours somewhere where I can't bill for it.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. It's not that I wouldn't, I end up going out and doing gratis stuff for people a lot of times that, that really are in a hard situation, and I'd rather just do it for them. But I can't in my business model actually afford to be out, spending a half a day at a house and make $300 or 200, whatever. I can't do it.
Yeah. There's, on top of that, like we talked about or just talked about before, is the labor shortage. And
Sure.
then I think there's the information or knowledge shortage that you layer on top of that. And it just makes it very hard to make progress. Again, I hope, the recent interest, the recent emphasis placed on this helps to move the dial, gets a few more consumers educating themselves or finding sources of education, get some contractors moving into doing these kind of things. But there's really no clear path. And I'm trying to think of someone who I could say has been successful, like an HVAC contractor becoming
There's got to be
successful. I think,
some, right, that have
yeah,
specialized and gone that route.
yeah. But I think they usually stick with the basics: humidity control, ventilation, filtration.
Yeah, it makes. I mean, and in the old parable, that to a carpenter, everything
Mhm.
looks like a nail. I mean, and not again, not for nothing, and not to pick on the HVAC market, but I mean, their interest and their knowledge and what their forte is mechanical equipment,
Sure.
and the peripheral equipment that goes with that. But being an IAQ consultant, not
Right.
really.
And again, there's a bias towards action. That's the way they're trained, and many people call on them to get something fixed today or in the next few hours. And if an IQ study requires a week of data collection, that's not in kind of the scope of what they do,
It's a
unless
different
it's a very
model. It's
unique.
not the
Yeah,
current
yeah,
model that
right,
they're all labor under.
right.
And even you go back to, some of the things, create that indoor action plan, including the HVAC inspections and maintenance. And I'm going back to these steps, right? And again, this first step, this is predicated on the fact that somebody's going to go out and do some assessments in the field,
Right.
you know, and And with certain entities, I think it's very feasible, right? Larger commercial entities can hire a specialized engineering consulting firm, industrial hygiene firm, whatever, to do a detailed study and actually get really a good basis for creating action.
Yeah, yeah, and again, Brian had mentioned something about a symposium where they were looking to make sure the IQ was as good as could be for a large gathering of 400 people. They took a look at the building systems and found them not to be in tip-top shape. I'll just say that. They did bring in devices and did measurements and did testing and put in filtration and made it probably the healthiest space I've ever been in the last 2 years. And then I checked with one of the auditors who actually sort of implemented, did the measurements and the changes. I said, well, this is great. What are they going to do? It's like, they're ripping it all out when we're done. That's
Oh,
frustration right there. It was
yeah.
more like, perhaps it was free diagnosis, maybe some free equipment. You'd need some maintenance on it or some filtration replacement, but it just wasn't viewed as important enough, to say like, you fixed it, but I'm not going to keep the fix. That's saddening. That was underscored some sadness in me.
Yeah, and that almost to me sounds like that's a situation where it was like a knee-jerk reaction to do something, that there wasn't really buy-in from the forces that be at that
Yeah.
entity, right? That it was like we have to do something because we have to show action, but when it comes right down to it, we're not really buying into
Well,
this need
it was more like, I think the conference management said, we really need to do this, and we're just going to get permission and do it. But in the end, it wasn't something that was bought into, like you said. It was, and I really hate to disparage anybody, but I would just say that's evidential of what goes on.
you know what? You're speaking in terms of actual reality on the
Yeah,
ground,
yeah,
and that's the problem. I think a lot of legislation initiatives and a lot of government, whether it be federal or state, I think there is behind them, there's good motivation, and there really are good intentions. But the problem is when the rubber meets the road, it's really hard to implement some things like this that are sweeping, and certainly the clean air. I mean, this action plan, this is something the EPA's been really championing in this whole concept for a long time, right? I mean,
yeah,
forever, building air quality. I mean, it's like we're going back to the late 80s now. Optimizing fresh air ventilation. Yeah, that I mean, I think that totally makes sense. That's something that's in the wheelhouse of mechanical companies, right? Checking economizers, setting things, your building management systems dealing with that. This is also, it's interesting though, this is very US centric, and it is because it's an EPA initiative. Because in
mm,
the United States, for the most part, outside air, with maybe
yeah,
the exception of certain urban areas, is a good thing. But as you go around the planet, right, you go to India, you go to China, and a lot of other places, outside air is really not an option because the outside
yeah,
air is
or
awful.
even wildfire areas, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And then of course, again, filtration, doing that, in-room cleaning devices. Yeah, it's interesting. No, there's no mention here though. What I found interesting is no mention of actually cleaning the mechanical equipment. I find that interesting.
Hmm.
I'm not sure why. Why that isn't. Well, there's something else that our editor Susan pointed out back while she and I were both remotely sitting watching the symposium, and what was very noticeably absent to us in all the discussions on this clean building challenge is anything microbial related. There was not a single thing, with the exception of they're talking about I guess you could say the
Yeah,
SARS-CoV-2 virus is microbial, but you know where I'm going is like the talk
sure.
of moisture issues, mold, and all of that. Like there was no discussion on that. And in my experience in 36 years, a good portion of problematic buildings have something that's a result of moisture problems and microbial activity.
Yeah, yeah. That is
You don't
interesting.
address that with mechanical equipment necessarily.
Right. Well, sometimes you do. If you're causing surfaces on which you can form condensation, and
Sure. Okay.
you
So
just
controlling
everything's in the
latent
yeah.
humidity load. Okay. Yep.
Right. Right. Right.
And that's another I think another problem that at least the industry's had for a while is that especially in residential, I really do need to separate this. In residential construction, I've seen over my career, over the years, contractors that really oversize AC equipment. Especially here in the north, they or everywhere, and again to have extra capacity, and that we both understand that that's a really bad idea
Right.
because you're going to short cycle and not get any humidity out of the building, and I've seen that happen in residences and commercial facilities a lot of times where they put in equipment and the place turns into a swamp, nice cold swamp though.
Yeah, right. And even oversizing heating systems, you run into comfort issues, or if you make some kind of change to the building envelope, with air sealing or with insulation, and you aren't right sizing the mechanical for the new condition, you can cause problems. And they might manifest as uh, durability problems or comfort problems. Um, so it's a whole series of things.
So looking forward, and I'm going to make you look into your crystal ball. Oh boy. Yeah, right. Yeah, that wasn't intended that way, but it's funny. I'll go with it. um what are your thoughts? What do you see? How do you see these initiatives like the Building Clean Air Challenge and maybe the Inflation Reduction Act? That regulatory legislation that's going on. What do you see happening? That's maybe the changes in store in the industry. Do you think these initiatives by the federal government will in fact affect change, or do you think it's too early to tell?
I think they will, because again, going back to something I said at the very beginning, was Uncle Sam says pay attention. It's important enough to broadcast this from the White House, to pull these people together, to start to provide at least a this action plan, this short checklist to work through. I think the other thing is people are becoming more educated and more aware and more sensitive to the environments that they live in. And I think that there's going to continue to be heightened interest and demand from consumers, which should pull through education. And I'm on a roundtable with the Building Performance Association. I'm also on the board and the treasurer of it. It's one of my volunteer activities.
Yeah.
The BPA industry roundtable, we're trying to get a consensus document going, talking about what are the best things that can be done in this situation, both for the things that are happening in the Inflation Recovery Act and also the Clean Air Challenge. Just this whole kind of concept together. The total home is definitely, or the total house aspect, total system aspect is on the table. And what I'd like to see from that is that the manufacturers are still promoting all the good things they do with their products, but the subcontext layers in the message of building or house as a system, the interconnectedness, and the one-offs that are the consumer should be aware that a one-off may not be the best way to do something. This particular thing they buy isn't the total package, and it may actually have some interreaction with other things going on. Again, putting in, for example, new windows, and you get some air sealing work done with that. Now you've changed the dynamics of the home. That needs to be understood, not to push more work on the customer, but to make them aware of ramifications of the things that they're doing.
I mean, do you think that there's, to some extent, like you're trying to have a consensus group like that, and I'm assuming you have manufacturers and a lot of different types of individuals
Yeah.
in that. Is that kind of like herding cats a little bit? Because they do have, I mean, to try to get them to collectively understand that there's a common goal, for, you know, making healthier, sustainable indoor environments. I mean, that's really what everybody should be in that goal. But uh, how do you address that type of, because there's obviously totally different uh,
Yeah.
triggers for these different groups.
Right. But I think it's if they would speak towards the house as a system, it as a sub message. It doesn't have to be the lead message, but if there's any principles to be built off of, 3 or 4 principles of house as a system that the manufacturer would talk about in the context of their marketing materials when they're pitching and selling their products. What I found, though, is it seems like the smaller manufacturers are attending every one of the meetings. The larger ones aren't, probably because it's hard to assign a person, or they change roles, or there's competing priorities to this. But the smaller ones, it just seems like there's, the passionate people.
Sure.
Slash crazy people like me.
Great. Well, yeah. Well, that's a subtext for passionate,
Yeah.
because you have to be somewhat crazy to be passionate.
Yeah.
Immature is what boring people call us fun people too. So that's another clear definer.
I've seen
What?
your Halloween costumes.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Because you've been at events where I've actually. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
You were in Portland, Maine 2 years ago, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that was crazy. That was after doing live streaming and being up for 27 straight hours. Then I went out for Halloween. It was
Yeah.
also my anniversary, which is like we were married on Halloween, which that's another subtext. But back to your point about the houses and system stuff. Your home that you
Oh, yeah.
built is a great example of actually looking forward and thinking forward. So tell us a little bit about that.
So when my wife and I, Marilyn and I, finally decided that we were going to live out our years in the Pittsburgh area, we found a nice plot of land, and then tried to do the best that we could for ourselves and sort of the environment too, to tread lightly, to borrow a phrase. So we designed a home that you showing that picture there, and I have a blog on it called SponeHome.com. I don't really do any advertising. I tell people the only thing I'm trying to sell is you to think different, and to try to provide evidence that we put together this package to actually build a home that in 2021 was net zero, all electric, very comfortable, and I think pretty nice looking. We had I'm not saying everybody needs to build one of these, but if you're looking at testing principles, I tested the principle of a cold climate heat pump in Pittsburgh, a climate zone 5, and then also tested the concept, put into action the concept of having very good air sealing, very low blower door number, managing the ventilation such that 3,000 square feet above ground and 1,600 square feet below ground, so a total of 4,400 square feet, could be heated and cooled by 2 tons of air conditioning, or 2-ton air source heat pump. So,
which that's kind of that goes against a lot of, at least the purported conventional wisdom, right? Because there's a lot of people, and I know Nate Adams is a big champion of heat pumps. I think heat pumps are great technology, but for years I always heard, you can't run them in the north though.
Or you need a crossover point where you need
Right.
to kick in some other form. So I switched off. I have electrical resistance backup just because it wasn't that much more, just to be a little bit safer. But I switched it off last year, or ever after we moved in. So we've never run with electrical resistance, all heat pump related. And I'm also very open. I have a Facebook group too called Spone Home, as well as this blog site. And I talk about even the kind of the challenges I have. We had some challenges with the heat pump installation. The first off one did not work correctly. There was a leak, but once that got repaired, that was in early 2021. Everything ran smoothly after that.
So I put up the graphic for your blog site. What I think was interesting is that you ran, you basically followed the construction process of your home, and it's a modular structure, right? This was so most of that was constructed off-site. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, yep. So there were 4 modules built in a factory over the course of 4 weeks, in a factory nearby about 80 miles away, and they trucked them to site, and those are the 4 modules assembled there. The thing that intrigued me once I learned about modular construction was Everything's done under roof. There's no environmental exposure to the materials during the process of construction. There's jigs, fixtures. The work comes to the worker versus the worker coming to the work site. There's no slogging around the mud or waiting for it to stop raining or snowing. They just come to the factory and work. And they do similar things day in and day out with all the tools, materials of construction readily at hand. So the delays in the quality of construction the quality was very high. The delays were not at all. In fact, they try to move things through pretty quickly. They literally have a roller table that they push the modules through the factory.
Well, I mean, it makes total sense when you think about it, because the way we, typically do a lot, well, most of our construction, right, is we do stick build, most residential, and your materials are sitting out in the rain. Here in the Northeast, it's raining all the time. We're always doing construction in the middle of the rain or snow or somewhere, some, unfavorable thing with guys slogging around like World War I battlefield.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to build and not get things wet, and then we wonder why we have mold and moisture issues in our building components before we even get the thing off the ground. So that does make sense. More of and the thing is, you have I think a lot better ability to control quality, right, in
Yeah.
production when you do it in more of a factory setting where you actually have some QA QC as opposed to out in the field where it's Wild West.
Yeah, I've done some presentations on it, as you mentioned, and I was in the homediagnosis.tv, Corbett and Grace's program, season 2, episode 5, where it talked about it too. Even I was able to visit the factory one time, and I caught a QA supervisor helping a worker lay roofing tile, roofing shingles on the house, in sort of like a little complex geometry that was there. But it was being coached to do the right thing. But being coached when there was like no wind, no rain, no
Right.
snow,
Right.
just on a step ladder. So everybody could see everything that's
Well
going
lit.
on, well lit. And like another picture I took, it seems trivial, but I saw somebody running a shop vac to clean up all the drywall dust as the module was being finished. When they finished the drywall work, they were running a shop vac and cleaning everything up. So they really cared about delivering a quality product. And I just, couldn't say more good things about the factory than that.
Yeah, and that's a bit of a paradigm shift for us. I know there's I mean there are a lot of, well, not a lot, but there are some modular builders that mostly high-end construction,
Right.
that's going on. Because I mean, I think there's also this maybe in the general public, they hear modular and they start thinking more like mobile home type. I mean,
Yeah, they
because
think
that's,
manufactured,
yeah,
modular and manufactured get
which
confused.
it's they're two totally different mindsets. I mean, cons- both built under the roof under controlled climate, but one is really kind of low cost, not necessarily the highest quality construction. But even like Energy Sprong, we've done interviews with people involved with that, with NYSERDA, and also from over in Sweden, and it's fascinating to me how they. The same thing. It's like they're doing retrofits, right? Net zero retrofits on existing buildings, but they're building all the panels and everything
Yeah.
in a controlled environment, and they ship them to the site, and they're able to retrofit a house to net zero in a couple of days.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is. And like I said, I'm, like not everybody can afford to do what I did, but if you want to see some data on how things operate, cold climate heat pumps, that kind of thing. And I tend to do more sharing on Facebook than I do in the blog, because things just kind of come to mind and I take a picture or copy a graph or whatever like that.
So your Facebook group's an open group?
Just request to join. It's not public, but
Okay.
Anybody can just find it and say they'd like to join.
Excellent. So we are getting toward the end of the hour, which I knew it was going to go fast.
Yeah.
I had like 7 other bullet points I wanted to get to, but but that means we have to have you back on again,
Okay.
and not wait 3 years this time. It's been a
Yeah.
while since you've
Yeah.
been on the show. So you know, and I concur with you that I think there's not just an opportunity for change and improvement now, but I think there's some things are going to happen. The market's going to get shaken up,
Yeah.
because the difference I think between now, in my mind, from indoor environmental issues, IQ issues, uh, with the difference between the mid '90s, is that there's money behind it this time.
Yes.
We didn't have that before. There was a lot of intention, and we're going to do this, and we're going to find funding, and that never happened. But the money's already there coming off this Rescue Act.
Yeah, and also even the lower cost sensors will get people interested. Sort of it's a gateway to curiosity, and you got to move from the curiosity to informed action.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Like I know some people take pot shots at some of the the lower price sensors, and no, a $200 sensor is not going to rival an $8,000 meter. It's not.
Mm.
Of course it doesn't. But then a consumer is not going to buy an $8,000 meter, and that's okay because like I said, I agree with you that I think they trend and they raise awareness because there's something at least visually representative in your home, right? If you're using it as a consumer, that's telling it's keeping you at least on alert that there's that you're paying attention.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
yeah.
To make some kind of informed action.
So, closing thoughts, and I'm sure there's at least one burning topic you didn't get to mention here because we didn't get to it.
Well, I
Anything
think
to close out and share with?
I think there's a lot of resources out there. If you're a contractor listening, HVACR School, just go to hvacrschool.com, type in IAQ. Brian does a wonderful job of collecting and sharing information. Again, and also the same show that Brian was on with Nate Adams, HVAC 2.0. He's got a lot of insightful, thoughtful things that he talks about there. And you can follow Nate, and his book, the Home Comfort book, is also, I think, if you're a consumer, you should download the free chapters from NateTheHouseWhisperer.com. I believe there's 4 free chapters out of 6 from his book. You could buy the whole book, but he gives you 2/3 of it as a free download. If you're curious about HVAC systems, sort of an unbiased tutorial on how they work. Not a super technical one, but enough to allow you to be conversant and ask the right questions. And then again, if you're a contractor involved with marketing these kind of products, the Energy Circle, energycircle.com, Peter Trost and his gang do an awful lot to communicate for contractors what's happening in the market, what are consumers searching for, and helping connect consumers and contractors with a lot of important things on energy performance, electrification, solar, IAQ, and then finally Building Performance Association webinars, recorded videos that you'll find there. There's a lot of great touch points for, I think, I would say, people that are in programs, contractors, and even some for consumers. And finally, something I think you probably talked about on this show is BPI has the Healthy Home Evaluator designation. And Healthy Homes is a little bit broader than just air quality,
Sure.
but it is a segment of that. And there are professionals that do have that certification too. So bpi.org and Healthy Home Evaluator. So I'm like giving it all up to be a connector. That's what I try to do. Is somebody has a question, I try to connect them with good information as well as provide a little of my own.
Well, it's always informative when you're on because you have a great insight. You've had a lot of experience and you communicate quite well, Bill. Yeah, and and the plugs for all these other resources I think is fantastic. Absolutely. Point out too, Nate Adams will be back for a full show. It was originally scheduled for next week. Next week we're actually going to be doing a pre-recorded show we did with ACAC. Andrew Adams from ACAC is going to be on with the show next week. I'll actually be at a CHPS event down in Houston, Texas, or just outside of Houston, Texas, live streaming for them. So that was kind of a sudden thing. So I got this cropped up, and they needed a live stream. So the live show for Healthy Indoors won't happen. I'll be currently doing a different show. We'll be back again live the following week on November 3rd with Nate Adams, though. So lots of good stuff coming up. Yeah,
Thank you.
It never ends. Never ends. Well, listen, Bill, this was great. We will absolutely have you on again in the not too distant future. I promise I won't let years go by. My excuse is there was a pandemic and it threw everything off.
That's a great excuse.
I'm still using that excuse.
Yeah. And you're welcome to come on my podcast too.
And I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to not have to actually do any planning and production
Yes.
and actually just be a guest.
Just riff on what you do.
That'd be a lot easier.
Yeah.
You know that.
Great.
Producing shows is a lot of work. So, yeah, we're at the top of the hour, kids. Unfortunately, it's time to say goodbye again. Adieu for a week. Well, like I mentioned, we'll be back next week with a pre-recorded show with Andrew Adams, and we'll also be back again with a full live broadcast on November 3rd. So, stay tuned for that. Until next time, I'm Bob Krell. I'm founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine. Always appreciate your input and your staying along with us. And until then, stay healthy.